I used to think silence was a blessing, but lately it feels like punishment. The house is always quiet now, like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to go wrong. The lights in the hallway flicker every other night, casting brief, trembling shadows against the walls. I keep telling myself it's just old wiring, nothing more. But the truth is, it feels like a reflection of us. Of me and the man who promised forever. My husband leaves before sunrise and comes home long after the moon is already tired of hanging in the sky. When he walks through the door, he carries the exhaustion of strangers, not the warmth of a partner. We still say all the right words. How was your day? Did you eat? Good night. But they fall flat, like lines recited out of duty rather than desire. His eyes rarely meet mine anymore. When they do, it's brief, distracted, already shifting past me toward something else. Or someone else. I don't know. I'm afraid to even consider it. Days stretch long and unchanging. The house feels heavier without laughter, without touch, without being seen. I started noticing little things I never paid attention to before. The crooked picture frame in the hallway, the thin layer of dust on the top shelf, the stubborn hum of the refrigerator. And maybe most of all, the burned-out bulb above the dining table we used to sit beneath for hours. Back when conversation felt endless and easy, I called an electrician because the breaker kept tripping. That was the practical reason, at least. But in some small, hidden corner inside myself, I think I wanted to hear another voice in this house. Anyone's. Even briefly. While scheduling the appointment, the woman on the phone asked if my partner would be home, just in case decisions needed approval. I laughed too quickly, then answered too honestly, no, it'll be just me. After hanging up, I stared at the phone for a long time. Alone. Always alone. The morning of the appointment, I cleaned more than necessary. I opened the windows to let fresh air inside, and then immediately regretted it when the cold crept in. I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, brushing my hair, smoothing the stray strands as if they mattered. As if he would notice. As if anyone would. Guilt rose unexpectedly. Why should it feel wrong to care about how I look? It shouldn't. Yet somehow it did. I imagined the interaction being brief, efficient, transactional, someone arriving, fixing what's broken, leaving a bill behind. Simple. Routine. Repair, replace, restore. I wished human relationships worked the same way. I checked the time repeatedly. Not because I was impatient, but because anticipation does strange things when you've spent months starving for connection of any kind. The hallway felt colder. The dim light overhead flicked when he stepped inside. His footsteps were careful, almost apologetic, as though he didn't want to disturb anything more than the broken wiring. He carried the scent of outside air with him. Dust, winter, and something unexpectedly grounding. His voice was low when he introduced himself, steady in a way I hadn't heard in my home for a long time. He spoke little, but the pauses felt respectful rather than awkward. And somehow that silence made space for thoughts I had been avoiding for months. I watched him as he worked, not in the way of admiration but curiosity. His concentration was unwavering, deliberate. The way he studied the wires reminded me of how carefully my husband used to study me when we first met, before routines dulled everything down. I noticed how precisely the electrician handled every tool, how he found the problem without complaint or blame. Something about it made me feel seen. Even though he never turned his face fully toward me, when he asked whether the lights had been flickering for long, I hesitated before answering. Without meaning to, I began explaining more than just the electrical issue. I spoke about the uncertainty, the long nights, the arguments that didn't sound like arguments because they were too quiet to qualify. He listened, not interrupting, not hurrying. His stillness felt like permission. He shared a story about a house he had repaired the previous week. The owner had been elderly and alone, grateful simply to have someone treat the place with care. He said some houses carried exhaustion. His tone held no pity, just understanding. Somehow his words felt less like small talk, and more like a mirror placed gently in front of me. I confessed I didn't remember the last time someone asked if I was doing okay, and genuinely meant it. He paused, glanced toward where I stood, but didn't invade the moment with any reassuring clichés. Instead, he returned to the work, and in the soft hum of tools and faint scent of copper, the unexpected truth settled quietly in my chest. I had been starving for concern without recognizing it, when the lights finally returned, illuminating the hallway with a gentle glow instead of the trembling flicker I'd grown used to. Something in me steadied. He wiped his hands, organized his tools, and told me calmly what he fixed. No overselling, no embellishment, just clarity. I didn't want him to leave, though I couldn't explain why. Not even to myself. At the door, he thanked me for the conversation, as though I had offered him something instead of the other way around. His gratitude was simple, sincere, and unexpectedly intimate in its restraint. I studied his expression, trying to memorize something I couldn't justify remembering. When he stepped outside, the house felt brighter, yet somehow emptier. I closed the door slowly, aware of a warmth in my chest I hadn't felt in years, terrifying, undeserved, and undeniably alive. When my husband came home that evening, I could tell he noticed something different, even if he couldn't articulate what. He paused in the hallway, glancing at the freshly glowing light overhead, but offered no comment. He walked past me with a tired nod, dropped his keys on the counter, and opened the fridge as though following a script he had memorized instead of lived. I tried to speak, but my voice stayed trapped behind the sudden weight in my chest. The memory of the electrician lingered, not in his image but in the feeling he left behind. Presence, attention, cared. At a tea dinner, the silence between us stretched like a fragile thread. He scrolled on his phone while eating, reacting more to strangers online than to the woman sitting across from him. I wondered whether I had been just as absent all this time, or if this distance had crept in slowly, unnoticed until it was too late. Guilt pulsed beneath every thought. My heart felt divided, not by betrayal, but by the realization of what I'd been missing and what I had accepted for too long. When I cleaned the table afterward, I found the electrician's business card tucked beneath a receipt near the sink. I must have placed it there without thinking. I held it between my fingers longer than necessary, rereading the simple print of his name each time as if it might answer a question I didn't dare ask. My husband walked past without noticing it at all. The lack of awareness stung more sharply than I expected. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. That night, I lay awake while my husband slept beside me, breathing steadily, peacefully unaware. My thoughts turned restless, colliding and unraveling. I wasn't wishing for the electrician to return. Not physically, not romantically. What I wanted was the spark of recognition he'd ignited. The reminder that I was still someone worth listening to, worth seeing, worth asking about. That I wondered what would happen if I told the truth, even a softened version of it. That a stranger had made me feel understood in a way that should have belonged to my marriage. The words formed in my mind, but I couldn't shape them on my tongue. Fear and loyalty wrestled in the dark. I questioned whether emotional absence could be as damaging as betrayal, or if I was exaggerating loneliness into something more dramatic. As morning approached, I noticed something in my husband's phone screen: reflection, hesitation, distance, distraction. A flash of guilt in his expression when he thought I wasn't looking. I didn't investigate. I didn't ask. The possibility that he might be hiding something of his own felt too heavy to confront. For the first time in a long while, I realized the silence between us wasn't empty. It was crowded with everything unsaid. I understood then that the flickering lights were never the real issue. They were just the first thing that failed visibly. Everything else had been failing quietly, steadily, for far longer. And now, I could no longer pretend not to notice. That I woke with a quiet clarity I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. The house was still, but it no longer felt accusatory. Instead, it felt like it was waiting for me to decide what came next. My husband sat at the kitchen table sipping his coffee, his eyes tired, guarded. For a moment I simply watched him, recognizing the man I had once chosen, and the stranger he had gradually become. Part of me wanted to blame him, to demand answers, to uncover every hidden truth, but the exhaustion in his posture made me realize blame would only add weight to an already sinking structure. We sat across from each other without the shield of distraction. I asked quietly if he was happy, and the surprise in his face revealed more than his words ever could. He hesitated, searching for something honest, then confessed he didn't know anymore. I admitted I felt the same. What began as simple truth became a slow unraveling, revealing the places we had both grown numb from neglect and routine. There was no shouting, no accusations, just two people acknowledging a fracture too deep to ignore. He asked if something had happened while he was gone so often, and I told him the truth, not about another man but about myself. I explained that someone had reminded me what it felt like to be listened to. Not romantically, not intimately, but humanly. It was uncomfortable to say but necessary. He lowered his gaze, not in anger but in understanding. For the first time in a long while, I saw vulnerability in his expression instead of apathy. We talked about the early days, when even silence felt warm. We talked about the hopes we shared, the promises we broke quietly by accident rather than intention. And then we talked about what we both needed now. Not excuses, not apologies, but honesty about our emptiness. He admitted that career pressures had pulled him away long before he realized how far he had drifted. I admitted I had stopped reaching for him because the distance had begun to feel permanent. There was no dramatic resolution, no sudden forgiveness, no clear direction, only the understanding that something had shifted inside both of us. Whether we would rebuild or part ways remained unanswered. But for the first time, the uncertainty didn't terrify me. I felt grounded in the realization that connection should never feel like a luxury. It should never feel accidental. Later, when I passed beneath the repaired light in the hallway, I paused. The glow was steady, warm, unwavering. I understood now that the electrician hadn't just fixed the wiring. He had illuminated what I had been refusing to confront. I had been living in dimness for far too long. The house wasn't brighter because of him, that I was brighter because I finally saw myself again. Something unexpected lit up inside me, and it wasn't desire. It was awareness, and awareness, I realized, is its own beginning.